Ladies and gentlemen, in today's video, we're diving into a powerful story of resilience, accountability, and the pursuit of justice. Meet Lenora Blake, a determined investigator who stands up for what's right, even when facing overwhelming odds. Through her journey, we'll explore themes of integrity, systemic change, and the strength it takes to confront difficult truths. So, grab a seat and get ready to be inspired by Lenora's unwavering commitment to justice and the power of standing firm in the face of adversity. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and share where you're watching from in the comments section. Your support will help us bring more meaningful stories like this. The early morning light bathed the quiet streets of Silver Rest Grove in a warm golden glow. The neighborhood, renowned for its serene ambience and picturesque tree-lined streets, felt like a retreat from the world. Tall oaks stood like silent guardians, their branches reaching out to filter the sunlight, casting dappled patterns on the winding jogging path where Lenora Blake found her moment of peace. The rhythmic sound of her sneakers hitting the ground was the only noise that punctuated the calm, aside from the soft hum of a podcast playing through her wireless earbuds. With each stride, her breath was even and measured, the stillness of the morning offering her a rare sense of tranquility before the inevitable rush of the day began. At 40, Lenora had solidified her reputation as a determined and fair-minded investigator. As the chief inspector of the State Ethics Bureau, she had spent years uncovering and dismantling corruption within public institutions. The job was relentless, and it came with its fair share of adversaries. But Lenora was unfazed. She thrived under the pressure, driven by the knowledge that her efforts were making a tangible difference in the fight for justice. After years of navigating the chaos of city life, she had made the deliberate choice to settle in Silver Rest Grove. The neighborhood's peaceful vibe, with its manicured lawns and slow pace, was her sanctuary. A place where she could reconnect with herself and find moments of calm amidst her demanding career. As Lenora jogged through the neighborhood, the quiet of the morning was suddenly broken by the low hum of a vehicle. A patrol car cruised slowly along the street parallel to her path, its engine a soft growl in the otherwise still air. Inside, Officer Dirk Haynes sat behind the wheel, his brow furrowed in concentration. The sight of Lenora jogging along the path immediately caught his attention, but not for the reasons one might expect. To Dirk, the image of a black woman jogging in a predominantly white, affluent neighborhood didn't seem to fit. Raised by a strict father, a retired military officer who instilled in him a sense of discipline and rigid ideas about control and belonging, Dirk's worldview was shaped by values that sometimes felt at odds with the reality around him. As he observed Lenora, his assumptions filled the gaps in his perception, and his instincts told him something was amiss. Dirk had worked this patrol beat for years, and in his mind, he was the guardian of Silver Rest Grove. He was used to maintaining the quiet order of the area, and the sight of someone who seemed out of place triggered a deep-seated reflex. Without a second thought, he flicked on the patrol car's siren lights, pulling onto the jogging path ahead of Lenora, effectively blocking her way. Lenora's pace slowed as she saw the car, a frown pulling at her lips. She pulled one earbud out, her confusion deepening as the officer stepped out of the vehicle. He was tall and broad, his uniform crisp and pristine, but his demeanor was tense and confrontational. "Hey! What are you doing here?" Dirk barked, his voice sharp and demanding. Lenora didn't flinch. Her tone remained calm and composed. She gestured at her athletic gear and the water bottle strapped to her waist. "I'm jogging," she replied evenly. Dirk's gaze narrowed, his suspicion unwavering. He stepped closer, eyeing her as if he were solving a puzzle. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area," he said, his voice laced with skepticism. "You match the description. Care to explain what you're doing?" Lenora blinked in disbelief. She couldn't quite process the audacity of the accusation. "I live here," she said plainly, her tone neither defensive nor apologetic. "I run this path every morning." Dirk's expression hardened. "No ID, I'm guessing?" he asked, arms folding across his chest as he eyed her skeptically. "I left it at home," Lenora responded, maintaining her calm. I didn't think I'd need it for a jog." "Convenient," Dirk muttered with a smirk, his eyes flashing with doubt. "No ID, no proof you live here. Sounds pretty sketchy to me." A few neighbors had started to slow their morning walks, their eyes glancing over at the scene. Some of them discreetly pulled out their phones, capturing the interaction from a distance. Lenora could feel the weight of their gazes, and though she wanted to remain patient, the frustration was beginning to seep through. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself before speaking again. "Officer," she said, her voice carrying an undercurrent of authority, "this is a misunderstanding. I'm not doing anything wrong." Dirk took a step forward, his stance imposing as he drew closer. "Misunderstanding? You think I'm new at this?" His voice was laced with contempt. "Either cooperate, or we're going to have a problem." Lenora's jaw tightened, her gaze unwavering as she looked him directly in the eye. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice low but firm. "Think carefully about what you're doing." Dirk's temper flared. "Is that a threat?" He spat, his hand moving toward his belt. He reached for his handcuffs, his movements sharp and deliberate. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Lenora didn't flinch. She held his gaze, her composure steadfast. "Officer, I'm advising you to reconsider," she said, her voice steady despite the mounting tension. "You're crossing a line." Dirk's frustration boiled over. He lunged toward her, grabbing for her arm, but Lenora was too quick. With a fluid motion, she slipped out of his grasp, leaving him momentarily stunned. The murmurs from the onlookers grew louder as they continued to record the scene unfolding before them. "That's resisting arrest!" Dirk shouted, his anger escalating. He took another swing at her, this time successfully grabbing her arms and yanking them behind her back. As he roughly slapped the cuffs onto her wrists, Lenora's calm demeanor only seemed to enrage him further. "You're making a scene," she remarked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, though it carried with a quiet authority. Dirk, his anger clouding his judgment, snapped back. "You made the scene," as he shoved her toward the patrol car. The door slammed shut with a force that seemed to echo in the quiet morning air. His hands trembled, a mixture of anger and unease coursing through him as he fumbled with the door. "Let's see how tough you are now," he muttered under his breath, his words laced with a bitter, hollow challenge. From the dense and tightly packed crowd, voices rose in protest, a cacophony of anger and disbelief filling the air. "She didn't do anything," shouted a man, his arm outstretched and his phone raised high, filming every moment, capturing the truth from his perspective. His voice was sharp, almost trembling with frustration, as he continued to challenge the actions unfolding before him. Another woman, equally enraged, cried out, "We've got everything on video. We saw it all." Their calls were a direct challenge to the narrative being pushed by the officers on the scene. They were demanding accountability, unwilling to let Derek's version of events go unchallenged. Derek, visibly sweating and feeling the mounting pressure of the situation, turned sharply toward the crowd, trying to assert some semblance of control, his voice tight with frustration but carrying an underlying edge of fear. "Back up, all of you," he ordered, his tone strained and harsh, if his authority alone could calm the escalating situation. But his command only seemed to embolden the crowd. It intensified their protests, their voices growing louder as they stood their ground. They weren't backing down. They had seen what had happened, and they weren't going to let Derek rewrite the narrative to fit his agenda. If you are still watching this video and found this story helpful, please comment one below to let me know you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Inside the patrol car, Lenora sat motionless, her eyes scanning the chaotic scene through the window, her face betraying no emotion. She appeared calm, almost detached from the chaos outside, but her gaze was unyielding, sharp as a hawk's. She was steady, resolute, not showing a hint of fear or uncertainty, as if she already knew what was coming. "You'll regret this," she said softly, her words carrying just enough for Derek to hear as he was distracted by his frantic attempts to control the crowd. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but there was power in it, a quiet assurance that left a lingering weight in the air. It was a warning, a promise, and one Derek would come to regret not taking seriously. "This is Officer Haynes, Silver Rest Patrol." Derek's voice crackled over the radio, his words strained and shaky as he tried to maintain some semblance of authority. "Suspect detained. Violent. Resisted arrest. Requesting backup immediately." His attempt to paint a picture of himself as the defender of order felt hollow and desperate. The exaggerated claims were his only defense, but they rang untrue, and deep down, Derek knew it. "Violent, you're lying!" a voice from the crowd shouted back, the disbelief in their tone palpable. "We saw everything. She didn't resist. You're making it up." The chorus of outraged voices grew louder, and the truth was clear to everyone present except for the officer at the center of it all. The onlookers weren't just filming, they were demanding justice, armed with the evidence to prove Derek's actions wrong. They weren't going to let this go. Not this time. In the back of the patrol car, Lenora's expression remained unchanged, her gaze cool and calculating. Her eyes locked onto the growing crowd as their voices echoed outside, the weight of their protests hanging in the air like a storm about to break. Derek, meanwhile, was oblivious to the storm he had just invited into his life. His confidence, already shaky, began to crack under the pressure. He waved the crowd off dismissively. "Move along, this is a police matter," he barked, his voice sharp, but the words lacked the power they once might have had. His tone was edged with uncertainty now, his attempt to reassert control falling flat as the crowd remained defiant, continuing to capture every moment of his failure. As the patrol car slowly pulled away, Lenora's eyes remained fixed on the crowd. She didn't flinch, didn't look away, and she certainly didn't let the protests disturb her composure. Instead, she sat back in her seat, fully aware that this moment would pass and that the truth would ultimately prevail. Derek had just made a mistake that would cost him far more than he could imagine, and she knew that. The protesters' voices followed them as the car moved down the street. "This is going online," someone shouted from behind, their voice full of determination. Lenora leaned back, unfazed, her mind already focused on the next steps. She knew that this was only the beginning. The viral footage and the crowd's outrage would all play a part in exposing the injustice, and she would be there to guide it to its conclusion. At the station, Derek entered with an air of misplaced confidence, clutching the paperwork that he thought would bolster his case. He strutted toward the counter, trying to appear in control like he had done something righteous. "One for trespassing and resisting arrest," he announced loudly, as if the words themselves would make his claims true. He added, "She got combative," but there was a lack of conviction in his voice now, a tremor that betrayed his fear of what was to come. Lenora raised an eyebrow at his words, but she remained silent. She knew there was no need to correct him. The facts, the evidence, the videos, everything was already in place to expose the truth. Derek's lies would not hold up for long. Moments later, the doors to the station swung open with a force that silenced the room. Chief Inspector Rio Winslow strode in, her presence commanding the full attention of everyone in the room. Her steps were confident and salute, each one carrying the weight of someone who had seen it all and wasn't afraid to make hard decisions. She was holding a tablet in her hands, the screen flashing with a live-streamed video that was damning for Derek. The footage showed his aggressive handling of the arrest, his dismissive behavior toward the crowd, and most importantly, the undeniable truth. Lenora had not resisted. She had not been violent. She had not done anything wrong. "Haynes!" Chief Winslow's voice rang out like a whip crack, and Derek froze mid-sentence, caught off guard. "Chief Winslow," he stammered, his confidence now completely evaporating, replaced with fear. "I was just handling—" "Save it," Rio snapped, her voice cutting him off as she slammed the tablet onto the counter with a sharp force, causing a few officers to flinch. The video played out for all to see, and the room was filled with murmurs of disbelief and shock as the footage revealed the truth. Trespassing? Resisting arrest? Combative? Do you even know who you just arrested?" Chief Winslow's voice was sharp and her gaze was hard as she stared at Derek. He swallowed, his throat dry, but he tried to justify his actions. "She said she lived there, but I didn't." Derek tried to explain, but it was too late. Rio was already cutting him off. "Lenora Blake," Rio said, her tone icy and unrelenting. "Director of the State Ethics Bureau, your superior." Derek's face drained of color, and the room seemed to close in on him as the weight of his mistake finally hit him. Lenora, standing tall, stepped forward, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable edge. "I warned you this would catch up to you," she said softly, but the gravity of her words left no room for denial. Chief Winslow wasted no time. "Your actions have humiliated this department," she declared, her voice cold with anger. "Effective immediately, you are suspended, pending a full investigation." Within moments, Derek's file was opened and the room was filled with murmurs as details about his previous conduct surfaced. Past complaints, questionable actions, and a history of misconduct were all laid bare for everyone to see. Derek stammered weak protests, but they were drowned out by the weight of the evidence. "Enough," Chief Winslow said sharply, her voice cutting through the growing chaos. Lenora addressed the room, her tone unwavering and resolute. "This isn't just about him," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "It's about the system that allowed this to persist, the culture that allowed someone like him to thrive unchecked. Change is coming, and it starts now." Her words hung in the air, powerful and unyielding, leaving no room for doubt. The room fell into a heavy silence as the gravity of what had just transpired settled in. Rio turned to the other officers, her voice carrying the full weight of her authority. "Let this serve as a warning," she said firmly. "We are here to serve the public, not abuse power. Anyone who disagrees can hand in their badge." Lenora exited the station, and as she stepped outside, the crowd that had gathered erupted into applause. The sound was deafening, their cheers filling the air, a testament to the support for her efforts. But Lenora didn't pause to bask in their admiration. She had more work to do. The road to change was long and challenging, but she was more than ready to walk it. This victory, small as it was only the beginning. As she walked through the crowd, the cheers continued, but Lenora's mind was already focused on the battles that lay ahead. The fight for justice, for accountability, for a better future, it was just beginning. The fresh morning air felt like a quiet victory, but she knew that there was much more work to be done. She wasn't going to stop until the change she fought for was a reality. Behind her, Derek sat alone in the break room, the weight of his actions crushing him. His fall from grace was inevitable. But for Lenora, this wasn't about personal retribution. It was about dismantling the culture that allowed such abuse of power to go unchecked for so long. Silver Rest Grove might return to its peaceful exterior, but Lenora wouldn't rest until communities everywhere were safe from the kind of injustice Derek had inflicted. As she disappeared down the road, the applause of the crowd slowly faded, but her resolve remained stronger than ever. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but Lenora was ready to fight for what was right, no matter how many battles she had to face along the way. The fight for justice was far from over. It was only just beginning. As Lenora walked away from the police station, the morning sun now fully risen, she felt an overwhelming sense of quiet determination settles within her. The day's events had only strengthened her belief in the significance of the work she was doing. It wasn't just about one isolated incident. It was about something larger, something that needed to be addressed for the betterment of the community. The community needed. The road ahead seemed long and uncertain, but she was resolute in facing it head-on, fully aware of the challenges ahead. The viral footage of Derek's actions had already begun circulating, and she could feel the ripple effect growing as it reached far beyond the small town of Silver Rest Grove. She understood the power of the moment. It would ignite conversations, spark debates, and inspire action. conversations that wouldn't just end with the video. Change, she reminded herself, often began with a single spark, and this, she knew, was that spark. If you are still watching this video and found this story helpful, please comment below to let me know you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Back inside the station, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Chief Inspector Rio Winslow stood at the center of the room, her commanding presence a stark contrast to the uneasy murmurs of the officers gathered around her. The weight of the situation had settled heavily over them, each officer feeling the impact of what had occurred. Rio's voice sliced through the silence with sharp authority. "This incident is a wake-up call for all of us," she said, her words resonating in the room. "We are here to serve and protect, not to misuse power or break the trust of the people we're meant to protect. Let this be the turning point for this department. Let this be where things change." Her words were met with a mix of nods and murmurs of agreement. But there were still those whose faces remained unreadable, their thoughts hidden behind a mask of stoicism. It was clear that Rio's message had struck a chord, but it was also clear that the road to reform would not be an easy one. Meanwhile, Derek Haynes sat in the break room, his head buried in his hands. The reality of his suspension was sinking in, and with it, the knowledge that he was now at the center of an investigation that would scrutinize his every action. The weight of it all pressed down on him, his thoughts racing as he tried to process what had gone wrong. But deep down, he knew the truth. It wasn't the circumstances, the situation, or anyone else. It was his own biases, his assumptions, and his inability to step outside of the narrow world view that had led him to this moment. He'd failed in his duty, and now there would be consequences. The door to the break room creaked open, interrupting his spiraling thoughts. An older officer, one who had seen more than his fair share of police work and its darker sides, stepped inside. "Derek," the officer said quietly, his voice laced with both experience and compassion, "this isn't the end, but it's up to you to decide what comes next. Learn from this, because that's the only way you'll find redemption." Derek didn't respond, but the officer's words lingered in the air, leaving him with much to consider. Outside, the crowd that had gathered earlier began to disperse, but the energy of the moment lingered in the air, a palpable sense of change. People walked in small groups, animatedly discussing what they had witnessed, sharing the footage, and reflecting on what it meant for their community. For many, it was more than just a video. It was an awakening, a jarring reminder that the systems they had trusted and relied upon were not immune to corruption or injustice. Lenora's calm yet firm handling of the situation had left a lasting impression on those who had seen it firsthand. Her ability to maintain composure in the face of adversity, to stand up for what was right without backing down, made her an unexpected hero in the eyes of many. Her name began circulating, not as a mere bystander, but as a symbol of accountability, strength, and the possibility of change. As the day wore on, news outlets picked up the story, and the footage of Derek's confrontation with Lenora went viral. The story spread like wildfire, sparking debates that touched on racial profiling, police misconduct, and the urgent need for systemic reform in law enforcement. In the midst of it all, Lenora remained focused. She knew the fight for justice was far from over. She returned to her office at the State Ethics Bureau, where a stack of reports and files awaited her attention. There was no time for distractions, no time to bask in the temporary spotlight. She had work to do. Work that would not end with one confrontation. It was a fight that would continue until the systems of power that allowed injustice to thrive were dismantled, one step at a time. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lenora sat at her desk, reviewing reports and preparing for the challenges ahead. Her phone buzzed with notifications, messages of support from strangers, interview requests from media outlets, and calls from colleagues who had heard about the events that had transpired. She glanced at them briefly, but chose to let them sit unanswered for the time being. There would be time for all of that later. For now, she needed to stay focused on the bigger picture. The work she did, the fight she had chosen, was far more important than any one moment in the spotlight. She couldn't afford to be distracted. In the days that followed, the ripple effects of the incident continued to spread across the community. The local police department announced a series of reforms, including mandatory bias training for officers, enhanced transparency measures, and community engagement initiatives to rebuild trust. At the same time, community leaders took action, organizing forums and town hall meetings to address concerns, foster dialogue, and find ways to strengthen the relationship between law enforcement and residents. Lenora, though she was not one to seek attention, found herself at the center of a growing movement. Her name was now synonymous with change, and she felt a quiet sense of responsibility to continue pushing for that change, even if it meant stepping into the spotlight. One morning, as she jogged through Silver Rest Grove, the familiar path seemed different. The air was still serene, the trees still rustled gently in the breeze, but there was a new sense of hope in the atmosphere. The world hadn't changed overnight, but Lenora could sense the shift. Real change would take time, of course, but that didn't discourage her. She was willing to put in the work, to fight the long fight, because, for her, this wasn't just about holding individuals accountable, it was about reshaping entire systems that had allowed injustice to thrive unchecked for far too long. And as she ran, her steps steady and her resolve unwavering, she felt a quiet but powerful confidence in her heart. This was a fight worth continuing, no matter how long it took. The road ahead was uncertain, full of obstacles and challenges, but Lenora Blake was ready. And as she laced up her shoes, ready to face the day ahead, she knew that this was just the beginning. The work, the struggle, the fight, it was all just beginning. Thank you for watching. We've witnessed Lenora Blake's journey of strength, resilience, and the power of accountability. So, what have you learned so far? Is there a moment in the story that resonated with something you'll carry into your own life? Please leave a comment below sharing one thing you've learned and how you plan to bring it into practice. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support means the world, and it helps us continue bringing impactful stories like this to life. See you in the next video.